We have had some interesting guests on 15 Minutes of Fact over time and explored some compelling topics. When it comes to the intricacies of economic theory and abstract financial systems, however, I get a bit nervous. Even my bravest listeners are rightfully wary, even though they know that they'll be subjected to no more than 15 minutes on any one subject, hence 15 Minutes of Fact. So I don't propose that we're going to lose even one member of our audience today with our guest, Mr. Zeus Yiamouyiannis. Is that the correct pronunciation, Zeus?
Yiamouyiannis.
Yiamouyiannis, thank you so much. When we reached by way of Skype at his home in the Philippines today, here's why you'll be interested. Somehow, Zeus is able to deliver in understandable English clear answers to today's economic train wreck. He magically reduces the complexity of trillions of dollars of currency, trade, and debt, and brings things down to simple accounting, almost the type of thing you'd be able to do at your kitchen table, but not quite. Because he is a Ph.D. after all, he's an economics blogger, a futurist, and author of the newly published book, Transforming Economy, from Corrupted Capitalism to Connected Communities. He writes for ZeroHedgeFund.com and UpToMinds.com, two top alternative economic websites, and is considered a performance educator in the way that he delivers information that informs as well as excites. Let's see if we can make that happen on the show today. Welcome to 15 Minutes of Fact, Zeus.
Thank you so much for having me, Jerry.
Well, it's a pleasure. So let me start out with that rather slippery word that you seem to use when you talk about the work that you do in economics, and that's transform. Now, is this a use of semantics to get past everyone's natural disinclination to accept change?
Well, I think there are a couple of issues when you use a word like transformation. The first is the notion of resistance to change. And I address this explicitly in my book. I mean, many people are under the delusion that you can choose not to change. We're in an era, as I said in my book, where things cannot go on as before. We know we will change. The only issues are, will change be done to us or will it proceed from us? So I think at this point, the only thing that you would be doing is essentially using your perception to avoid reality that's already upon us. The second is also important, and that's romanticized notions of change that sort of substitute ineffective replacements, the kind of maybe new age, fantastic thinking that if we just hold hands together enough, or there's a technological solution that's going to come out of the woodwork and save us all.
Wait. You're telling me that Kumbaya and the Google is not going to save us in this particular world we're living in?
Not without human consciousness and decision to let that change and transformation in consciousness work. And that's what I really advocate for and try to work with others to provide. I mean, there's the necessity of change, there's the reality of change, and then there's the opportunity for change. I'm excited by that notion, and I think we could get more people on board if we show that change can be an exciting and purposeful and deep way to live. And
well, then let's get to the subject at hand, the economic disaster that we're calling the Great Recession. I've read through some of your earlier works, and two stand out for me. One is called 5 Courageous Steps. I like it when people give me numbers and quantities to work with. The other is called 10 Shocking Practices. Now, are they part of your just-released books? Or are they precursors? Tell us about them.
Well, they're both companion pieces to the book. The first one, 5 Courageous Steps to Transform Your Economy, really is about what you can personally do to sort of see through the haze provided by our current economic situation. It's actually available to your audience for free. If they just go to transformingeconomy.com and sign up at the sort of newsletter or email list sign up, they will get a free copy mailed to them through their email. That's, again, more focused on how you can translate some of the broader principles I have in my book to actual personal practices. The second 10 shocking practices in the U.S. and global economy are really a greatest hits list of some of the most outrageous things happening in the economy, and it's meant to be, and then some follow-up questions to stimulate discussion. It's meant to be a companion piece to my book, and if people do get it, I'm for the first people who are doing this, especially activists, I'm writing out a personal email and sending that along, regardless if you buy just one book or more. So that
well, I want the listener to know that there were some really excellent, shocking items there that we're aware of, but not aware of how really horrendous they are. Can you name 3 of them for us?
Well, my greatest hit is fraud closure. I'm astounded that two things happened with fraud closure. One, there were hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of forged documents that are clearly, I mean, there's no dispute that they were forged. I mean, people have admitted that they were forged. In order to basically, there was an electronic system set up to do an end run around filing requirements for property. And then
well, you're talking about the famous robo-signing and things like that.
Robo-signing, and there was nothing done about that. There was no real prosecution. There was not even really any investigation. What I found when I did research is that this $25 billion Attorneys General solution ended up being, most of it, only about $8.5 billion was supposed to be in cash. That was never really done. Only $1.5 billion was spent. It was spent on consultants. And I found as recently as January of this year, not a single dime has really been spent on a homeowner. So it's a big, huge smoke screen. It muddies the whole chain of private property, which is supposed to be the sort of bedrock of economy in terms of who owns what and what an asset really is. And nothing's been done about it. It's been swept completely under the rug.
Which, of course, leads me to my next statement of dismay, and that is one of the unquenched coals of anger regarding the recession is that the culprits, the big banks, their thieving executives, have not been held accountable for what are clearly financial crimes. Now, nobody else has answered it. Why is that?
Well, there are 2 parts to that that I could see in writing this book. The first is simply this. I mean, it's very obvious. The people that are working on enforcement have been members of these banks that are being are not investigated, as it turns out, and they are just simply protecting or trying to protect their own former turf and their relationships, and they cannot separate their own lives and what they consider to be benefit for themselves personally and their official duties. That's the first part. That's more obvious. The other one is really sneaky and incredibly condescending, and that is this notion that we have to excuse high crimes to prevent the suffering of the little guy. If these big firms collapse, how many people will be thrown out of work? Lenny Brewer, who was the head of the criminal division of the Department of Justice, resigned after, I think, a Frontline piece in which he basically said, if we indicted them, the company might fail. It's like, really? A criminal company might fail if you indict them. It's like
the people I want to see thrown out on the streets are exactly the people that you're talking about.
Exactly. The main point is this: there can be no market without accountability, and in the present system, there really isn't accountability. I mean, this is what I want to say to them. You're trying to protect what? The market? Well, if you're trying to protect the market, you need accountability, which means you need to prosecute people who do crimes.
Well, that brings up the larger picture of debt, something that seems to afflict everyone but the famed 1%. Some people say that we should simply walk away from debt as individuals and even as a country. Now, are these debts that toxic, so toxic that they cannot be converted into something that is usable? What's your opinion about this?
Well, many of them are. The entire derivatives market and the debt that was created out of them, something like $1 trillion of so-called toxic derivatives were bought up by the Federal Reserve, are nothing but junk. They were constructed vehicles that referred to basically fantasy assets and collateral and had no real purpose except to generate fees and to generate cash flow from nothing.
And bonuses. Don't forget the bonuses.
Absolutely. The Wall Street rewarded themselves after they collapsed the entire world economy with a near record $144 billion in compensation. And they do that by basically extending counterfeit value in the form of these constructed fantastic, when I fantastic meaning like pure fantasy, economic vehicles that aren't backed by anything, just simply refer to assets. And then they make off with the transaction fees and bonuses and on false paper profits. So an asset. This gets at the core of debt as asset. Debts have been considered assets. It's a very twisted notion, and they certainly aren't assets if people start defaulting on them. Debts require ability to pay, and because that has been forgotten. We now have a situation in which these so-called toxic assets and toxic debts really are junk. We're going to have. I advocate in 2 chapters in this book not only debt forgiveness, but also finding ways to administer debt forgiveness. Because when you have something built on fraud, one of the titles is, has to do with endgame. When debt is fraud, debt forgiveness is the last and only remedy. So we don't expect a person to have to pay for a crime. If they are extended money in a fraudulent way, why should they have to pay it back? Now, there is intricacies in how to deal with that, but we really should get... Go ahead.
Well, I was listening to an interview that you had done with Max Kaiser on his show called On the Edge, and I was struck by 2 things. First, the show was all about, and this was 2 years ago, matter of fact, it was on September 17th, 2011. It was all about the Wall Street meltdown, and coincidentally enough, on September 17th, that's the exact day that Occupy took over Zuccotti Park. Was this coincidental, or is it something that you pulled together yourself?
I would call it auspicious, a meeting of the minds. We just need voice. What it's showing is that voice is finding a way to coordinate and pop out in ways that we don't expect. And it gives me real hope, because voice is the start of action. Real people need real food, water, clothing, and shelter. They can't go on, extend, and pretend. And finally, especially with Occupy Wall Street, people are finally saying, and we need real accountability. They're starting to come out, and we're finding that one of our basic needs that people have forgotten about is our need for community and our need for voice. So, to me, I just see it as a kind of universal upsurge and an auspicious coming together of people who care.
Well, how could your book be of value to occupiers and activists, not even considering the mainstream mom and pop out there who haven't given a lot of thought except a lot of their pain and blood, sweat, and tears to surviving? How can your book possibly help in the face of implacable and resolute enemies that we have both in the government and in banking? How would you, for example, counsel students with their staggering debts?
Well, first of all, I think I would just simply say get active, creative, imaginative, and organized. One of the best ways to do this is to stop feeding the beast. That's one of my steps in the 5 courageous steps to transform your economy. And there are specific ways to do that in the book. But I think the most sort of important thing about that is to start taking leadership, not to be reactive to the current system, to take as much energy away from it as you can, identify toxic practices, which I do in my book, and then take as much of your time and money away from that system as possible. Use your leadership to organize, to create the creative alternative. And my last chapter in the book is called Youth of the World Unite, How the Younger Generation Can Lead the Way to a New Frontier. There is so much talent and ability there, and so much responsibility and liability being dumped on young people. I think they just need to go ahead and face that, organize together and find ways to be really resourceful and pull themselves out of that essentially death spiral that former generations have provided for them, and develop their own leadership going forward. There are specific ways to do that.
Okay, so what would it look like if we actually had an economy and a society built around the things that matter most to us? What would those things be, and what would that world look like?
Well, basically, my book is about going toward a democratic capitalism. We've never had it, but basically it is money serving people, not the other way around, people serving money. It also involves, because we have a sustainability issue, us really going from a more material to a non-material basis for our purpose of living. And that's already kind of happening. We want to move from a taking, exploiting, consuming society to a creating, giving, and sharing society. And now that's not kumbaya. The tagline that I like to use sometime that I created is, I am a more fulfilled me by a more effective we. If we can begin to develop that notion, and it's already coming up to the younger generations who not only believe that, but experience that as quality of life for them, then we can begin to turn the tide.
Well, I can't think of a better note on which to conclude our 15 Minutes of Fact show today, Zeus. So allow me to ask you to give our audience some contact information on you and your book so that they might reach out to you directly. Now, I know your email address is Zeus, as in the famous god, Zeus, at citizenzeus.com, and that's your website as well. You're also on LinkedIn, and I noticed that you're also on Facebook. How else can people reach you, and how can they find this book?
Just type in, www.transformingeconomy.com. That will bring up the main page. Email sign up where you can get 5 courageous steps to transform your economy. There's a book link there where you can, and click on Get the Book, where you can actually pick up the book. And I'm trying to develop community forums and so forth, but that's more in the works. You can also get at my main site, just having to do with transformation, and that is citizenzeus.com. It has really focuses on transformation in economics, education, and spirituality. So if you have interest in those areas, go to citizenzeus.com, and you'll see some of my past essays there as well. So those are the 2 main areas I would point people to. And again, you can contact me anytime at zeus@citizenzeus.com.
Well, Zeus, I can't thank you enough for the time that you shared with us. You are living up to your reputation. I didn't fall asleep once, and I hope that will be true of our audience. Now, that's a good start, not falling asleep. I actually think you've activated me. I think that just might be happening. So, once again, this is Jerry Ashton with 15 Minutes of Fact, searching out people with interesting ways of dealing with what we call the Great Recession, different and more likely fruitful ways in which to be able to build a stronger we so that you can become stronger yourself. You can find me, of course, at Huffington Post, where I blog, on Twitter as @WrittenOffUSA, that's @WrittenOffUSA, and, of course, on LinkedIn. Jerry Ashton signing off for WGRNradio.com, 15 Minutes of Fact.